That's not bad. She's almost on a regular field.
Yeah. She was really excited. It was
Kyle's in
exciting.
Arizona
It was
right
exciting
now.
to be at a college showcase and have her hit the fence.
Were there a lot of scouts?
Not at the 12-year-old games.
No.
They played up to 14.
Yeah.
But we did go over and watch for the 16s and 18s, and I mean, Jensen got out because a lot of people, players are not allowed to talk to coaches. Right. So Jensen gets out of the car and she's like, hi.
We've had guys
like
go up and
starstruck.
approach them.
Yeah.
Say, I hope you're going to come watch me. I mean, that's what
Yes. It was super cute. But there's a new rule or something where they can't even speak to them until
I told you there's new rules.
Yeah.
I don't know if it applies to girls, but there's new rules where you're not even going to be able to go out after these younger ages now. They're going to have to hit, like, when they're junior or senior?
it's a junior.
I mean, now they can go out and scout them all the way 8th grade.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know what? And I would like to see you be able to give 3 verbal commits and then make a decision from your 3 verbals.
Has Kyle made a phone call yet?
He's got a verbal commit.
Well, I knew that, but did he call and tell me when he was going? No?
He's going to go.
Is he?
I think he's going to go. I think he's going to go pro, personally.
Yeah, right? That's this. And you said he's in Arizona.
They just start today. So
What, just a tournament?
yeah, it's a big
It's just for us. Very nice.
Did you get my email? I said you're 12, dude. So we leave for South Carolina for fall. Tuesday night. We're leaving first. Jimmy's flying out to South Carolina Wednesday, so it's Thursday to Monday. to go ahead and call to attention our board meeting for today. If you would rise for a moment of silence followed by the pledge. Thanks. Thank you very much. At this time, we only have one public input card. Mr. Yoakum, you are up.
Vance Yoakum, I write the blog fiscalrangers.com. I can't imagine why there aren't more people here to give public input about mental health and budgets in the same day. This is exciting. Mr. Ward, I'd like to welcome you to where, oh, there he is over there. Welcome to the firing line. I went out on the website, like I've always done in the past, looking to try and find and understand the convoluted budget process that the school district has had. As you know, the prior CFO just was not oriented towards providing transparency. In my opinion, it was unprofessional. In all the companies I worked at, I've never seen anything quite like that. But you know, now we have a new superintendent who's doing great, and she's brought on a new CFO, and so I'm looking forward to hopefully some changes. But I went on there, and they've got all the lists of the topics, and you clicked on it. There's no link. There's nothing at all for this current proposed budget. And it's kind of late in the process. The county has already gone through about 6 or 7 presentations. This is their adopted budget. They have a printed version available and a PDF version. Okay, it has metrics. It has information on every department. It has comparative information. I went to the Lake County Water Authority recently, and I'll give you a copy of their budget. Their budget, it's only about, their revenues are only about $5 million. They spend actually more. They spend about 15, and I'm still trying to figure out how they do that. But they have prior year to compare, and this is their proposed budget that they are working on. They worked on it last week. And it shows the change in dollars and the change in percent. That's the type of thing I always saw in corporations I worked in. And this is only a $5 million organization. And you guys, one of your 2 main functions is budgets. And so I would hope that you set some criteria now. But we've got some new great staff on board. There's no 2018-19 proposed budget online because you haven't had any details. In the past, the CFO did do that, but she gave you these arcane big printouts from the computer that had a lot of gobbledygook in there that wasn't necessary for your view or the public's view to understand. And so there's no consolidated detailed budget. If you go and look for prior years, you don't find much. And so what I'm asking for, and I recommend, is that you start moving toward understandable budgets. You have something that can be viewed by the public, and both you and I can understand, and is on the record, and it's available in PDF format, and hopefully in printed format. I did have to pay $40 for this, by the way. So finally, on this day in 1860, Lizzie Borden was born. I just thought I'd throw that in there in case you didn't catch that in the history lessons in the school district. And also in 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention was held. So we end on an education note. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yoakum. All right, Mr. Ward. Three minutes?
3 minutes? Yes, sir. You know what's up?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
If you would like, we can go ahead into the first slide and we'll get started. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had to click. Okay. This presentation is early in our process, and I understand the concerns from the citizen, and will say that, you know, there are some plans to move this process even more forward for next year, give both the public and the board a lot more opportunity to have input. In Alachua County, where I came from, we did start this process 2 to 3 months in advance. It's not a refined process, but we can go ahead and have conversations and discussions, which is good for the budgetary process. So, you know, I apologize for being kind of late in the game this year, but we will do better. This presentation today is going to take a talk about some basic information. I'm sure most of our board members are versed enough to understand this already, but for the benefit of the public and those that are new to the process, I felt like I should go over some basic information. We are, each year, we're required to produce, and the board's required to approve a balanced budget, and I want to say the word balanced with emphasis because it does have to be balanced. We're not the federal government. We don't have the opportunity to pass an unbalanced budget. We have to balance. Our top numbers have to match our bottom numbers, our revenues and expenditures. So, and we have to do that following an established truth and millage process. It's established in the state of Florida. It's required by a legislator. And the process is a process that informs taxpayers and the public about the legislative process by which you, the local taxing authority, will determine the ad valorem property taxes. The law provides for public input, and governing bodies and taxing authorities to state specific reasons for proposed changes in taxes and the budget. When levying a millage, which we'll do, taxing authorities must follow Chapter 200 of the Florida statutes, which governs TRIM, or Truth in Millage. Felt it would be important that we go over the TRIM calendar. The TRIM process is very specific in how we do things. It gives us timelines with very little opportunity to vary from those timelines. A lot of it has to do with the beginning of the process and what days of the week they fall on, but usually you'll have a 2 to 3 day window to approve something in the process. Monday, July 23rd, 2018 at 6 p.m., the school board will approve the advertising of the tentative millage and tentative budget in its regular scheduled board meeting. And at that meeting, I will have in front of you that advertisement for your review. So you'll be approving the advertisement of something that you'll know what you're approving at that point in time, as far as the advertising goes. On Tuesday, July 24th, we will submit that tentative millage and budget for advertising to the Daily Commercial, so that it will be publicated on Friday, July 27th. And a part of the TRIM process is within 3 days of that publication, we have to hold a public hearing. So on Monday, July 30th, 2018 at 4 p.m., we will present and discuss the tentative millage and tentative budget in a special school board meeting. And per TRIM requirement, at 5:01 p.m., the board will hold a public hearing on the tentative millage and budget to allow the public an opportunity to provide input into the process. Sorry, I lost my place there. On Monday, September the 10th, 2018 at 5:30, the board will hold a public meeting to present the final millage and budget during a special board meeting. Following the public hearing, the board will adopt the final millage and budget. So there is still some opportunity to make some changes. There are some restrictions on those changes. We cannot increase the millage, which we don't have the authority to do so anyway. And then we cannot, obviously we can't increase the budget because we're restricted by revenue anyway. So, but we can make minor adjustments between the two, between the tentative and the final, which is normal because when you do the tentative budget, you don't have your final numbers for the prior year, which is key in that process. So it's nothing that's different or new. So for today, I thought I would go over some financial trends, and I go way back just so that we can paint a picture as to what's been going on in education for the last modern time. I did stop at 2003, and the reason why is because my source of this information came from the state, and they do have information prior to 2003, but because of the changes in the FEFP process, it became too difficult to compare prior to 2003. The numbers just don't compare without doing a lot of research. because they move things around within the FEFP. This slide here shows the total state and local funding for operation. And this is the general fund that we're talking about here. And this is the FEFP that we receive through local and state funding. And this is what the legislator approves each year and tells us what we can and can't do. You can see that we do have growth. We had some steady growth between 2003 and 2008, and then everybody knows we had a bit of a recession there. 2009, 10, and 11, the state propped up its education funding with some federal dollars, the ERA dollars, if you'll recall. And then after that, the ERA dollars dropped off, and then it went back to just state and local funding, and that's 2012. Since 2012, you will see a steady increase up through current year, fiscal year 2019.
How much of this is like pass through, like the charter funding and
The charter funding.
and the
I don't have
McKay
the-
scholarship?
Correct. I don't have that exact number right now, how much of that is passed through. I think we pass through about 40 million of that each year, currently about $40 million. So, and about 3.5 on McKay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just looking at.
Oh, so 40 for charter,
Yes, ma'am.
and I know McKay is about 3.5.
Yes, ma'am.
3.5.
And there are two components that determine the state and local funding, two main components that determine the state and local funding. One is that the number of students or the full-time equivalent of students that we have, and the other is the per-student amount that the state legislature decides to fund each year.
So we really haven't gone up since 2007.
I'm sorry?
If you like subtract out the charter pass-throughs and the McKay and
Yes, ma'am.
has Hope hit us?
Not yet, it'll start next year.
Okay. So it's basically the same amount.
Correct. So part of that growth that you saw on the prior sheet, and this includes all numbers for the district, it's not just the traditional schools. You can see our weighted FTE full-time equivalent has been increasing over the course of the last years. There was a sharp increase until 2008, and then it's kind of flattened out for a little bit, and now we're starting to see some gradual growth into the current year. And of course, this is preliminary numbers for weighted full-time equivalent. There will probably be some more transitions between now and the second calc and third calc, which each calculation, you obviously know, they will again adjust our FTE. I know 2 more students are moving in the county because 2 of mine are starting this fall. This is the per weighted student funding for operations. This is the other part of that growth. And you can see that this shows a little bit more volatility than the other component. From 2003 till 2008, we saw substantial growth. Again, in 2009, 10, and 11, you'll see it's flattened out, and that was with the ERA dollars, the federal money that the state provided to us. 2012, you'll see a decline, but you'll see an increase in total funding for operations since then. Although that sounds great, obviously the economy has also increased, which also means that our expenditures have increased.
Can I ask you one
this
quick-
slide here, yes, sir?
The 2.9 million, the one-time compression,
Yes, sir.
is that in the
Yes, sir.
2019?
Yes, sir, it is. Yes, sir. This is comparison of the weighted student funding from 2008 that has been adjusted for the Consumer Price Index. So if you take the 2008 per student funding and you adjusted it each year for the Consumer Price Index and compare that to the actual student funding that we are receiving, you will see that there's a large gap there. So our expenses have outpaced our revenue per student. A lot of entities, both school districts, finance officers, boards, union leaders, other concerned citizens, they like to compare district to district, what happens and what goes on, how are we doing compared to others. It's part of benchmarking. And one of the things is the unweighted student funding, which is provided by the Department of Education. And you will see that these are the bottom 10 districts in unweighted student funding, and you'll see that Lake County is 10th. It should also be noted that out of the 67 counties, we are the 10th lowest. This does not take into consideration any voter-approved millages. Marion, Seminole, and Alachua County all levy an additional millage that's been voter-approved. So although they may have lower unweighted student funding out of the FEFE program, they may actually have a higher per student funding when you include their local voter millage. The next slide is the top 10 districts comparison of unweighted student funding. And Lake County is shown at the beginning just to show the per student amount and how much the differences are. Obviously in Monroe County it's a lot more expensive to teach a child, and we understand that, but just for comparison's sakes, we wanted to show the top 10 compared to us. But I would also like to add that Monroe County, along with Gulf and Sarasota, also levy an additional millage, so they actually have more funding than what is reflected in this presentation. Before we go any further and talk about millage, I thought that I should at least go over and try to, I will say, explain the millage rates that the taxing authority will levy soon. The millage rate is the value of tax multiplied by the taxable value of property divided by 1,000. And again, the taxable value of property for us, our millages are levied against a school taxable value, which is different than the county's taxable value because of different exemptions that are provided to the county. The rollback millage rate is the tax rate necessary to equal the prior year's tax proceeds when multiplied by the current year's taxable value when adjusted for new construction and additions. This is the hard one for everybody. The rollback millage, you can actually levy a lower millage, but still have to advertise an increase in taxes because of the rollback millage. The rollback millage is if we wanted to apply a millage today with our current taxable values that did not give us any more revenue, that would be the rollback levy. So the required local effort is the millage we are required to levy in order to participate in the Florida Education Funding Program, and that millage is set by the Florida legislators. The discretionary millage is the millage set at the discretion of the board. The discretionary millage is capped at 0.748 mils, and although you have the opportunity to not levy that or levy less than the maximum, there are components of the FEFP that are reduced when the board does not levy the maximum. So if you don't levy that full amount, there are components of the FEFP that you will lose additional funding to. The capital outlay millage is levied for capital outlay purposes, and it is capped at 1.5 mils. And other than a voter-approved additional millage, the board does not have the ability to levy an additional millage at this time. So although TRIM requires you to go through all of this process to levy these millages, your hands are really tied in setting those millage rates because they are set by the state. The only thing you have discretion in is the capital outlay and the discretionary millage. If you don't levy the full discretionary millage, you lose other funding opportunities. And obviously, our capital needs far outweigh our 1.5 mils. This is a chart of Lake County's millage for education. This is a trend from 2003 through 2019. And as you can see, the local taxpayers are paying less millages each year for education. The peak was in 2004. I've got that right here. The largest millage levy since 2003 was in 2004 for 8.440 mils. In 2009, the legislature reduced the maximum capital outlay millage from 2 mils to 1.75, and then the following year, the capital outlay millage was again reduced to 1.5 mils. The legislators have not increased the millage for capital outlay since. for the 2019 fiscal year, the maximum levy for the district, including capital outlay, is 6.355 mils. This shows the school taxable value, a history of it since 2003. As you can see, the home values were increasing and the taxable values were going with them up through 2007 and 2008 where it peaked. And then from 2009 on, it has a good curve where it showed a decline through 2013-14, and then now it's back on an increase for fiscal year 2019. This is the first year since the housing market failed that school taxable values have exceeded that peak.
Does this include the rollback?
This is
Or
just
is this a hypothetical?
This is just the school taxable value. So this is the property values that are provided to us that we apply the tax to.
Okay, so if the legislature requires that we roll back the millage.
This doesn't
And
have,
go with
this
the
is
lower
not
number?
impacted by the rollback at all. This is just a school taxable value.
Okay. So it's hypothetical, sort of,
Okay.
right? Yes?
I'm not real clear on your question because it doesn't have, this chart is just the school taxable value. This is not the tax or the rate. This is the value of your home that the tax rate is applied to.
But it depends on the tax rate.
It depends on the value of the home.
Oh, got
So
it.
as home values go up, and then you had the housing market crash, the home values went down, and now they're coming back up.
Right, but like last year when the legislature rolled back the rate so that we had a lower tax rate, that's not in this chart. Is that right, Kim?
No, they,
She understands what I'm asking.
next slide.
Maybe
Next
not.
slide.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry. This slide shows we superimposed the local taxes for operations on top of the school taxable value. The trend in public education for a long period of time has been that the local taxes for operations have followed very closely with the school taxable value. And you'll see as 2003 through 2009, you'll see that school taxable values went up and local taxes went up along with the school taxable values. There are some differences, some variances between the two. They don't quite correlate, but they do follow the same trend. 2009 through 2013, they both trended down, and then you'll see them start trending back up until you get to 2016. In 2016, the legislature took a different approach in how they were funding the education and how they were applying for local taxes for operations. They started rolling back at a state level our required local effort, and in doing so, they were lowering our tax rate each year, even though our property values were going up. And that's the first time that I know in my short history in education that they've done that. And so you will see that we are not following the trend anymore where the local taxpayers are keeping up and funding education as they have in the past. So as their tax values are going up in their homes, their taxes are being decreased instead of keeping up with the trend. The tentative millages for 2018 and 19, and we just received this from the state Tuesday, I believe it's 6:15 in the afternoon. The set required local effort, the actual required local effort for next year for the district is 4.100, but there is an adjustment that we have to add to it, and so it is 4.107 mils. That is the required local effort, and although you have to go through the TRUM process and you have to advertise an increase in taxes, you are not actually increasing your taxes. The state of Florida is for you, but you still have to go in front of the public and say that. The discretionary millage is 0.748, and that is the maximum, and the maximum capital outlay millage is 1.5 for a total millage of 6.355 mils for the 2019 fiscal year. So for a home with a school taxable value of $125,000 and a homestead exemption, the homeowner would pay $635.50 in taxes for education in the next year if you levied the maximum amount for discretionary and capital outlay in the future. And
Can
just,
I ask you a question? Mr.
Yes,
Boyd?
ma'am.
So the top number, the required local effort, is the one that's going to justify the legislation change?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
We don't have a projection of what it would have been had we stayed current?
No, ma'am. And we haven't calculated the rollback rate yet.
Okay.
We will do that
Okay.
very quickly.
Is there-
Because we'll be part of the advertisement
Okay.
on Monday.
There's also a November referendum for an additional homestead. I'm really not up to speed with it, but has Are you?
My understanding is that homestead exemption will not apply to school.
Okay.
The legislator, when they apply these additional homestead exemptions, they've been very careful because they include the local taxes as part of their education funding. And if they grant that homestead exemption, they're probably going to have to either show a decline in their funding of schools, or they're going to have to increase their state level to cover that loss. So they've been smart in applying those additional exemptions only to the county side and the other taxing authority sides, but not their schools.
I'm thinking
Yeah,
the
so
counties
they-
aren't thinking that's all that smart.
Yeah, I would agree with them on their side. They're not all that smart, but and just for historical purposes, in 2009, a home with a school taxable value of $125,000 and a homestead exemption of $25,000, they would pay $844 in taxes for education. So taxes are down. That pretty much covers the millages. We are not, at this point in time, ready to go over any detailed expenditures for the county. We have gotten the school budgets in. We've got the allocations in, which is the major part. We have the school budgets in. We have most of the department budgets in, and we're working on refining some budgets in order to get the numbers to balance so that by Monday we can provide to you the advertisement and the budget so that you guys can be prepared to approve the advertisement for the following week. But I did want to go over some statistical data, just kind of show you that, where our priorities are in the past and where they will be this year, and try to paint a picture for both you and the public as to where a lot of our budget goes to in schools. And as I'm sure you've heard several times, the majority of our budget goes into our salaries and our benefits. This slide shows by type, it shows salaries, employee benefits, purchased services, and that purchased services there does not include the amount of money that we pay to the charter schools. When you forward the money from FEFP into the charter schools, it goes through that purchase services amount. It would be an additional $40 million in purchase services if I reflected that there, but I was trying to show both you and the public the expenditures that you truly have control over and in your traditional schools and your board operations. Energy services, material and supplies, and that includes everything from classroom supplies through custodial supplies, textbooks, everything necessary to supply our schools and our departments for operation. Capital outlay, but that is the capital outlay that's included in the operational fund. That is not the capital outlay budget for the district. That will be shown in a separate fund, capital outlay budget, and we will go over that at a separate time. And then other. Those are just other miscellaneous type expenditures in the district.
Where are you going to be reflecting the additional cost for safety and security?
When or where?
Where?
In this, it will probably be mainly in purchase services because that will be contracts to the SROs and to the cities. Okay. And then whatever additional salaries, employee benefits, and some minor supplies and materials for the Guardian program and for the administrator.
Will all be in purchase services?
No, the couple of employees that will be ahead of our department will be in salaries and employee benefits, the first two categories, and then some of their materials and supplies will be reflected in the fourth category.
But the SROs will be in purchase services?
Yes, sir. The SROs will be in purchase services.
And they're there now or no?
No, sir. This is the 2018 budget just for.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. This breaks it out by function. There are several functions, and we group them together. Like instructional support, there are actually 6 different functions for instructional support, but we group them together just so that you could kind of see in a summarized fashion where we spend our money at. As you can see, the majority of the funding is spent in instruction at the schools. This is the 5,000 function area. And to be listed as a 5,000 function salary, you will be pretty much in a classroom. It may not be a teacher, it may be an aide or a teacher support type person, but in instruction are classroom expenditures directly. Instructional support is mainly in the schools. There are some at the county level. But instructional support are those people that are involved in supporting the classroom and instruction of the school, but they may not be delivering instruction directly themselves. And then school administration, and then you've got the other general administrative services, and this is the board, this is the superintendent's budget, this is finance, personnel, and your other chief of operations, all rolled into one group. And then you have student transportation, the operation of plant, which majority of that will be in schools also, maintenance of plant, which would be a mixture of schools and administration, and then you have your administrative technology services. So I really put this up, this is kind of showing you the past history to show you, kind of give an idea of where most of our money goes, not only for you, but for the public to see that, you know, the majority of our funding does go to the schools.
I think one of the most popular questions we've seen from the public is, well, how does that break down percentage-wise? Do you have the percentages for any of this, or a comparison from prior years?
Yeah, and by the way, this is just a salary and benefit expense, so this isn't the operation, but obviously from the prior slide, you know that the majority of our expenses is salary and benefit. 63% of the salary and benefits expenses are classroom instruction. 11% of the salary and benefit expenses are instructional support, and 8% of the salary and benefit expense are in school administration. And I didn't break any of the other ones down, but I'll be more than happy to do that for you.
So what defines school administration versus instructional support? Like are we talking just APs and principals in school administration?
In school administration, primarily, yes. And it may be some of their support people that are directly with them. So if you have a school secretary that is assigned directly to the principal, his salary would be assigned to administration. If that same secretary position was helping someone in the media area, then they would be assigned to instructional support. Any other questions on this? So the next slide is school allocations for operational funds. We have these numbers at this point in time. The allocations were provided earlier. There have been a few adjustments, but this slide is to kind of show you a comparison of last year's allocations to the current year allocations, and this is the allocations at the schools. You'll see in the 2017-18 budget, there were 3,784 school allocation units assigned, and there were 30 allocations that were increased for growth from the beginning of the 17-18 year till the current budget. And then, so you have a 3,814 subtotal, and then there was a decrease. There were some adjustments to the formula and the application of those formulas during the allocation process this year, and you can see that 148 units were reduced. And so for the 2018-19, currently, we have in our budget 3,666 school allocation units. So you can see that there has been an effort to reduce the allocations at the schools. We are also making reductions at the district level, but I don't have that to present to you today at this point in time.
These are teachers. Yeah.
Not only teachers. It could be other school support, or it could be other school administration. It's not just teachers. And as you'll know, we are hand-tied mainly, for lack of better terms, by the Class Size Reduction Act. We can't reduce teachers beyond the class size reduction limit. So we had to make a lot of, and I say we, this process happened before I got here, so I don't want to take any credit for that. But they had to adjust in other areas besides teachers. So, okay. And at this point in time, that's really the information I have for the presentation today. We are going to be working diligently between now and Monday to get that advertisement prepared, because not only do we have to present it to you guys on Monday, but we have to have it ready for advertising Tuesday so that it can go to the newspaper and make Friday's publication. So at this time, we'll be happy to answer any questions, or if you have any concerns or direction, I'll be happy to take it at this point in time.
On the allocation part, as schools are still taking enrollment, and also as the class size or the students in that, say, kindergarten or first grade as they increase, but yet they've only been given X amount of allocations. We're making arrangements to make sure we have that taken care of.
Absolutely. We budgeted an additional 20 positions to hold out for growth.
Okay.
If we exceed that, then absolutely we'll have to come in and increase the allocations to ensure that we are in class size compliance. So absolutely we'll adjust throughout the year as we always do.
Okay.
So to your point, I know you've been on staff such a short period of time, so and I think I can certainly appreciate the sense of going in and looking at everything with a new, fresh set of eyes to capture hopefully some savings and some budget realignments that will help us overall as an organization. That's undoubtedly a big job. So I guess looking at some of the things that we've historically seen going into the budget, that's the stuff that we'll see on Monday, or that we'll get on Monday. Like, I'm thinking department details. I think we've typically had the enrollment projections. Last year we saw the remaining balances in each school's discretionary accounts, all those projects and categoricals. Those are sorts of things we'll see on Monday. Is that right?
We'll be happy to share that with you.
Okay.
I know Karen has looked at this, so I'm going to ask this. Seminole County advertises that they have 85% of their funds in classrooms. And I know that this board has, for what, I want to say 5 years now, gone back and forth on what is in classroom. But when you look at the comparison of fiscal year 18 budget for salary and benefits, and you see the instructional support, school administration, and general administration, is there a way to shift, like with 63% in instruction, is there a way to shift more? Are we looking at, how are we looking at ways to shift more, or is it, and I'm giving you an out, so, is it that Seminole County looks at all of these categories administrative, or?
Well, and I think I can explain some of that. There are three major things that are required to be provided at the same time. There's the budget, there's the annual financial report, and then there's the cost report. And more than likely when they're referring to 85% expenditures, and there's a report that's put out by the state, and that report draws from the cost report. The budget document and the budget process is obviously one of the most important things that we will do, the board will approve, and we'll work with you guys to do, because that is, that's our legal limit to spend, but it's also the way to keep our operations funded correctly and to keep everything going without us bankrupting, et cetera. So there's a lot of time and effort spent in the budget. The audit, or the annual financial report, is audited. It has a lot of requirements, general accepted accounting principles. It has to be audited externally. It has to meet a lot of requirements, and it has to be presented in specific ways. The numbers that you're looking at are being pulled from the annual financial report, and they are following the standards of the audit. So we have to follow the Red Book of Accounting. The cost report follows the Red Book of Accounting, but the cost report has an additional element in it where the people who are preparing it can allocate indirect cost to classrooms. And that seems to be one of the biggest differences between school districts in the state of Florida. One, there's no real set criteria on how you allocate that, so each district may do it differently. Second, it's not audited or reviewed by anybody. As long as you meet the set expected criteria when you submit percentages to the state, then they will accept your cost report. So as long as you're not shifting 100% of your cost in one area and they expect 30% to be there, as long as you get within their parameters, they let it go and it gets published and put out. And it's used a lot of times for comparison from county to county, but it's not the most accurate document to compare. I have addressed a concern already about how much administrative cost we allocate to administrative versus classroom. And I think there's some areas that we need to look at on our allocations to be presenting a more accurate picture. I also know that there are some school districts, when I talk to other finance officers in the past, who know how to work the system better to add more cost in areas so that it reflects a better picture. I'm not saying they're doing anything nefarious, but, sometimes their opinion of how to allocate something may be more beneficial than my opinion to allocate something. But we're going to try to refine that process this year so that we'll have something that's more reflective of our actual costs. And then hopefully it'll become better comparisons to the other districts that follow the same principles.
The biggest concern that I have, and Mr. Dodd and I, when he first came on the board, and we met with the CFO, depending on how you ask the question, I got one answer, he'd get another answer, and so here is what the concern is, because now then, with you just saying 63% isn't, because I've been using 85% because that was the number I was told.
And if you take the...
Wait a minute, Karen wants to say something.
That's just salaries. Yeah, that's just salaries.
Just salaries, that's not materials or supplies, or it's just salaries.
That is correct.
Oh,
This
okay.
is-
So it's 85% all in.
Well, Seminole County
But
is 85%.
salaries includes administration.
But is Seminole's 85 just salaries?
Well, I would have
Which
to...
that seems pretty high.
I would
And I
have
know
to...
she's looked at Seminole, that's why I asked.
I would have to go back and look at how Seminole was presenting that and where they were taking the data from. As Mr. Ward explained, if they're taking it from their budget or from their cost report, those would be two very different comparisons and wouldn't be an accurate depiction. So before I speak about what we saw on that very colorful dollar that they had for Seminole County, I'd like to go back and look at exactly what they were comparing. But
I like your colorful dollar.
But again, if on this chart, all we have is the salaries, when you add benefits in there and your supplies and your materials, other purchase services, things like that, you would get a bit different in the percentages. So we can go back and do that if you would like to.
But here is what I think is important to me, because there is a benefit to benchmarking other similar counties to us. And to say that they do it different, hence the numbers are different, I think that with your ability to communicate, that we ought to be doing it the same.
Yes.
So it can be accurate.
Well, we've had discussion for a while too about the red book and the coding that comes along with the red book and what would depict dollars being spent in the classroom versus administrative dollars, and that's not ever a number we've been clear on either. Defining what you think impacts the classroom, what you don't think. So I know that conversation has come up several times too, and we talked about it probably a year and a half or so.
Can we just use Seminole's method?
I don't know. Well, if that's the best one, I don't know that. I mean, I would like to look at it before we just grab it.
We could always benchmark something against something.
Well, and that's the thing that came up recently with one of the candidates saying that our administrative expenses are very high and going through, and then really drilling down, it turns out it's not accurate, but it's the way that we report versus the way they report.
Right.
And I would say to you that at some point, pick the counties that are similar in size and talk to them, and then let's benchmark exactly how they do it. Or convince them to do it how we're doing it. But one way or the other, we need to be able to have a document that the public can compare, because if you say, that's just not true because they do it different, that doesn't fly.
I understand. Yes.
And it shouldn't fly.
Right.
I mean, we should be able to get there in less than 5 years.
I agree.
Well, in the same thing, what they're saying, then also explain how we get to that. This is all included in this, and this is how this came to that, versus this is just salaries or instructional or whatever, not including benefits. That way, it's more explained that even I would understand it.
Well, and that's the thing, like with Seminole County or just picking a county, is I want to know how they got to their dollars. I don't want
Right.
to just mirror what someone else is doing if they're not
Right.
doing it accurately. So I hesitate. I think Seminole County does a great job of their marketing of how great their schools are and 85% of their dollars, but what does that constitute? Because I don't want to just put that out there and then people ask us, well, where'd that number come from? We don't know. Seminole County did it that way. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
And I
we
get
could
what you're saying.
itemize
It's
Seminole's
really important.
method.
Don't get me wrong. It's very important. I'm on the same page with you, but I'd like to find the best way that we can all roll forward. I don't know that the other counties.
If at the end of the day, if they're marketing 85%, and if at the end of the day, all in, we're at 85%,
Right.
then we just need to be saying the same thing.
Well, I think the challenge we've been experiencing is that there is a multitude of methods out there, right? And Seminoles might be the most generous method, I don't know. But when we received these charts in the past of here are similar counties and this is where we compare, Seminole might be the only one that used that method, and 8 other counties might have used another method. So would we pick the one that the one used because it sounds the best, or would we pick the one that is most common practice? I think probably the more valuable piece of information is looking at our own trend using the same method year over year and seeing if we are shifting in the correct direction. And I think that's the indicator, right, of whether we're going where we want to go. Speaking about your question, though, about how we were getting different numbers, I think we were asking about different things. See, at the time, I was asking about what percentage of instruction, or what percentage is the instruction of the overall budget, not capital, but of the operating budget, salaries and benefits, materials, all the other stuff, what all goes into a classroom. And I think your question was what percentage of salaries were instructional. And so I was getting 54%, and you're getting 63%, because we're looking at 2 different things. So.
The other comparison would be when we would compare to another school district, there would be, differences among them. For instance, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? No? The other difference would be the number, say, of charter schools in that other district you're comparing to. So we'd have to make sure that we were comparing apples to apples if we were comparing to another district.
And it's never really going to be flat out apples to apples because of the comparisons are not going to be totally identical. But I think in what is being said is if we had a comparison, even if we kept what we have, but then we showed if we did this like they do, this is what it would come to. But this is how we do it. This is how they do it. So if we did this, then we're at 85% also. I mean, just so that.
But we drilled down, being fair, drilling down, an example specifically is IT and comparing different districts. And IT, is it instructional or administrative? And we've reported it pretty accurately, what's in the schools versus what's at the county office, where very clearly other counties throw it all in instruction. And you can just see it in the numbers.
That's right. That's the red book classification.
That's the red book. And that's what I'm saying is, in the red book, that at the end of the day, those that are trying to evaluate if we're good stewards are looking at that document.
Yes.
Right.
And so if other districts that it's reasonable that IT is in instruction, then maybe we ought to follow that. If it isn't reasonable, then don't do it.
Right. One of the last functional changes in the Red Book, and the Red Book does not change that often. Usually if something new comes along, a requirement to keep track of something for the legislators' interest or whatever, they'll add an object code from time to time. But the only functional change that I've experienced in the last 15, 16 years has been the change to how the function of information technology has now been recorded. It used to be all recorded together, and then probably about 7 or 8 years ago, they wanted to break out administrative from the schools. And in doing so, there wasn't a lot of explanation from DOE. It's just a paragraph to read, and it was left up to everybody else. And I think once people made decisions 7 or 8 years ago, everybody has kind of stayed with that same decision within their own district. I think it would be beneficial for us, and my plans are to, when we go through the cost reporting this year, to really look at that process again and determine out, which costs really do need to be here at the district level, and which costs, even though they may be this department at the district, they truly are supporting the schools and need to be recorded on the school side. So that number probably will change this year, but it'll be changing to something that we believe is reasonable, not necessarily just change it so we can compare.
But did you do a comparison of how you reported when you were in Alachua versus the way we're empirically how we were doing it?
Yeah, I did.
And what did you find?
What did you find?
Well, I didn't go in deep. I just looked at it and thought to myself that there's probably some more expense that are being put on the administrative side that could be easily moved over to the school side. And so when we get to that process this year, I'm going to bring in Mr. Wheeler, and we're going to have some conversations as to what really is going on in his operation so that we can make sure that we're doing it correctly.
But none of that, I mean, all of this is just playing with numbers, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's right.
so like,
I wouldn't use the term playing with numbers. I think we should use some reason in the application of the numbers. There probably is some playing of the numbers in some other districts. There may be some playing of the numbers here, but I haven't had an opportunity to really get into that at this point in time.
So I guess what we're saying is some districts have read the book How to Lie with Statistics, right?
Yes, sir.
And really that's what it was.
Which is a blue book.
Right. That's where I go back to what is our own trend analysis saying about our district, and that's the one that I think I'm more passionate about understanding.
Okay.
Any other questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you, Mrs. Briggs, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're up, Dr. Landry. I'm sorry, I need to speak up a little bit today. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. Excuse me, I'm going to pour myself some water because I've been having some throat, and I have this for backup just in case there's an emergency. I'm excited to be in front of you again today to be able to talk about the mental health plan. We're going to talk about a couple of different things. This was a little too much water.
Can we take we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Okay. Thank you. Take two. Thank you. I'm going to talk with you again today about the mental health plan. So I'd like to just remind you that we are talking about the Senate Bill 7026. Specifically, it's a very large bill, so specifically the Mental Health Assistance Allocation Plan. Per the statute, 90% of the money that they are going to be expending to us must be spent on provision of mental health assessment, diagnosis, intervention, treatment, and recovery services to students who are at risk. And additionally, coordination of services with primary care providers and other mental health providers involved in the student's care. So I have two things for you today. First is our 10-page mental health plan. It's organized around goals, and I shared this with you at the previous meeting in terms of the goals and the objectives. I wanted you to have the actual plan in your hands to have some time to dig in and review it, if you'd like to, prior to the next school board meeting. This plan and the expenditures will come up for your approval on the July 23rd school board meeting. So you'll have this plan. I did want to say there will be a few tweaks prior to the 23rd. For example, if you could just look at the last page, page 10. One of the requirements of the state is that I have to provide numbers and credentials for all of our personnel who we hire directly, who are mental health specialists, as well as the agencies with whom we contract. So there are still some blanks there that I'm going to have filled in for you, of course, by the 23rd. Yes, sir.
Does the $1,038,000, is that our allocation?
Our allocation is $1,044,000. Okay. And I will go over every line of that with you. So additionally, regarding the mental health plan itself, the state has provided a checklist that they will use as they go through and evaluate our plan. So I need to fine-tooth comb this and make sure that we've hit all of those areas that they're going to be looking at. If there are any major changes to this, what you have in your hand, I will bring it to your attention when I submit the document for the 23rd. Okay? So this I just want to leave with you so you can review and call me if you have any questions. And for public review, of course, also. Yes, sir.
Are you of the opinion that the $1,044,000 is adequate to get where we want to be?
No.
Okay.
I think the plan that we've created this year is a fantastic start. I really do. I'm very excited about the plan and what we're spending the money on and the collaboration. But we don't meet the state allocations for the mental health providers that we have. We don't have enough psychologists, social workers, nurses, or counselors. So I have to say no.
So will we see not only this equaling the dollars that are allocated, but also what you would need to really serve our kids?
I haven't drawn up exactly what we would need. That's something I could certainly consider doing.
Well, I think that's a critical piece for information for the public for the referendum that we're looking at. What are the needs? That's right. So I think that information would be valuable to us.
In terms of dollars?
And how it breaks down.
Yeah. We need to really drill down because a major component for me on the 0.75 we're asking the public is for that intervention, that we really need to see what that would look like. Because if $1,044,000 would handle it, then we'd be kind of stupid to be asking for it.
Right.
Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah. But we need it. I mean, thanks.
Let's see. So so I'm leaving the plan with you for review. The second part of what I want to do with you today is to walk through the expenditures. So I provided you with an expenditure document, and I want to emphasize that this is not a formalized budget that's been approved through Mr. Ward's office. This is an informal way, simplifying the money and how I'm proposing that we spend it. Okay. The budget will be ready to go prior to your approval on the 23rd. So first, well, let me wait on that slide because first what I need to say, the first line there is, per statute, each one of the charters has the right to take their proportionate share of our allocated money. Of our 9 charter schools, I haven't heard from one yet, and only one charter, Imagine South Lake, has decided to take their proportionate share and create their own plan. So I've already received from them their plan that is approved by their board. So when I submit our document to the state on August 1st, I will also submit their document with ours. The other 7 charters have elected to leave their proportionate share with us and participate fully in everything that our mental health plan will offer. Okay? So that's the first expenditure you see there is, yes, sir.
If they're going to leave it with us, then are we supplying then the assistance?
Yes, sir. Everything
To
that I
their
will do with
schools.
all schools, they will
Okay.
receive as well. Yes, sir.
How does that hurt us? Does that hurt us?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
So we're not providing proportionate, like a disproportionate number of services to the charter?
No, because as you'll see when we get into it, half of our money we're spending on personnel. And for those personnel to serve 7 extra schools, I don't think is
Well,
a burden.
so I had the same kind of question there. Does it hurt us? And I kind of looked at that at a different angle, and that so if we're providing the services to them, then this ties up the personnel in visiting those schools. Are some of these personnel difficult to recruit? So if they were not serving those schools, would they be able to serve our schools more fully? Granted, right, because you give some of these schools a proportionate share, but they wouldn't be able to go out and hire somebody because there isn't somebody to hire because we already have them servicing our schools.
I think if they took their proportionate share, they wouldn't be able to afford to hire someone. They
Right.
would not, I think it's smart on their part, they would not, with their proportionate share, be able to build anything close to what we're building. They wouldn't even be able to hire one person.
Yeah,
I think there are people. I got 45 applicants.
Oh, so there's no shortage of applicants.
I haven't reviewed them. My guess is half
Hopefully
of them
they're
don't qualify because that's just the way it is when you post positions. But I do think that there are positions to be filled. They just wouldn't be able to afford it with their proportionate share.
Would we be able to afford it if they pulled their proportionate share out?
Their total proportionate share was a little over 100,000.
That's what I was, well, it's 25,000 for South Lake, and then we had 4 others, did you say? So
We have 9 charters.
it would be 8 others.
8 others.
But it's not all the same cost.
It's not all the same because some of them are
Differentiated.
small.
Right,
Altuna's proportionate share
By
is very
FTE.
tiny.
So it would
Yes, sir,
decrease our
unweighted.
funding by just over $100,000.
I believe so. I could.
Right. 1 1/4, almost 1 1/2.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
How much of our positions?
It's on the budget page.
Yes, we will get there. Let me look at the total, 132,000. And this is an estimate per Karen Briggs.
So almost
These are
full.
estimates, but. Should we go? Yeah. Okay. So about half of our allocation, we're proposing to spend on mental health specialists. I talked with you about this at the last school board meeting. I'm looking to hire 6 of those folks, and then additionally, the professional development, travel, and then uncapitalized software that would be connected to them.
Is that missing a 0? That's what it is. I'm like, what?
On the personnel?
I think so. 6 mental health
It
specialists,
is.
500,000. Okay, I'm
Yes.
like, okay.
Yes, thank you.
It's right here.
It's correct. It's correct here, not in my PowerPoint. Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
500,000 for
And that's
6
weighted
mental
with benefits.
health.
So that's salary and
Yes, sir.
benefits.
Yes, sir. The table that is below that was created by finance, and so it kind of outlines, and that's a mid-level projection for their position, so could come out to be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the expertise of the folks who apply. I did want to share that uncapitalized software licenses have to do with the mental health assessments and evaluations that they will be doing, the scoring and the reporting that comes with doing those assessments. There are licenses that go along with those, so that's for 6 of those licenses. Uncapitalized software, I was estimating $6,000 for. So our mental health community partner is LifeStream. And we have spent a lot of time in collaboration with them talking about barriers to high-level services. So those students who are at risk, what are the barriers to them receiving services from LifeStream? And one of the main topics that we talked about was families who are underinsured or uninsured. So in past years, for students who are referred to LifeStream for the cadre of services that they offer, they have been able to cover some of the students who their insurance companies say, well, we'll pay for 5 sessions, when in reality they need 25 sessions. LifeStream's been able to pay for some of that, but not all of that. They've had to turn families and students away from services. So one way that we thought that we could help support and maybe take down that barrier a little bit was to provide a pot of money, $250,000, and they would pull from it over the year in servicing uninsured students. And for those families where they don't have any insurance, they will be invoicing us about $73 per session. For underinsured students, typically it's copays that kind of get in the way of whether or not they can pay for services. So we will be helping cover copays for families who are underinsured or have private insurance where their copays are quite high. So what we've discussed is probably that won't even cover everyone, but that's what we will contribute, and then they'll pull from that pot either until it's gone or we'll use the money for some other means if we get to the end of the year. Okay.
That's a shared cost. So obviously they've got some cost there as well. When that pot of money runs out, then is this a 50-50 deal, or do they kick in more or less?
I'm sorry?
So when that pot of money, when this $250,000 runs out,
then they will serve them in the ways they've been serving them in the past. They'll be able to cover some, probably not all, but this is going to help them cover the majority of families and students, I think. Okay. They described about 250 families that they couldn't cover last year. And so when I played with those numbers, this 250 seemed like that would help cut that quite a bit.
And is there any shared cost with the family as well? Does the family share in that cost?
Well, if they are, for example, if they are uninsured, our first attempt is always to try and get them on a Medicaid plan so that they can have some funding to support those services. Mm-hmm. But some of them just don't have any. And so I think for some families there won't be any shared costs.
Yeah, well, I just kind of trying to figure out if we do some sort of financial needs assessment. I mean, some people with insurance or without insurance, they can afford it, right? They just choose to not carry insurance for whatever reason.
I would have to ask, but I would imagine that they have some sort of a sliding scale that they work from.
Okay.
Are we actually really pushing that we get these kids signed up on Medicaid? Because the last group I sat with, there was a lot of funds that were available that we weren't even tapping into. Because
Through Medicaid?
Medicaid.
Well, we're beginning to bill Medicaid, which helps. We've had training come through our office, student services, social workers who work with families, counselors will be next, to talk with families and help them navigate that process. It's extremely complicated and time-consuming, so I think our efforts are much more than they used to be. We're aware that there's all these plans for Medicaid, and let us help you. Let us take you somewhere where there's a place where someone can help you. We're much more aware of it than we have been previously. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
Right.
Yeah. So in terms of clinical collaboration, what we'd like to do is have a central contact at LifeStream, a person who will coordinate the mobilization of all of their services in terms of crises, clinical services. They have a CCOS team that employs 19 therapists who work in Lake County schools, and so the coordination of that is quite massive. And if we have someone who's our contact, we believe a lot of that service provision will be smoother and more direct. We also want to form a local review team. It mirrors what's being done at the region. So if there are high-level students who are involved with multiple agencies, so maybe they're involved with DJJ, DCF, and they're also alternately placed here in schools, what we would do is have a local review team where all those agencies would come together, talk about that student, and talk about services and what needs to happen next to help that family. We want to mirror that process, and in order to do that successfully, we really need LifeStream at the table for those meetings. So that's one of the things that clinical coordinator would help us coordinate.
So $60,000 is what we're going to contribute to that coordination.
Yes.
In partnership with
Yes, ma'am.
Live stream?
Yes.
Okay.
This
Is
is
that
officially
the
their
whole salary?
employee. I'm sorry?
Is that the whole salary?
I don't believe it is their whole salary. It's a proportion of their salary. But my understanding in talking with Mr. Cherry and Ms. Baird is that their primary responsibility would be to Lake County schools. And similarly, a mental health assessment specialist would not only do some of the same duties as the clinical coordinator, but also do assessments of students who are deemed to be at risk to themselves or others. So those highest level need students who need a clinical assessment by a licensed mental health person, and then assign clinical diagnoses. Sometimes you have to have a clinical diagnosis to move on to the next step of services. Also, they would help connect our students to the services that sometimes we have trouble getting to. Inpatient hospitalizations, residential care. There's been a gap that we've not been able to skip over, where our students actually need those really high-level services. These folks are going to make that gap disappear, I believe, because they're going to be involved in all of the cases of those high-needs children and kind of pave the way and make sure we're doing the referral process like we need to and get those students to the highest level need when they need it. That's kind of when we hear the state folks talk about this plan and the governor's vision. One part is for every student in our schools to have access to mental health services, and this plan does that. We have that plan through the multi-tier system of supports, and we're going to be doing lots of things. But the other part of that plan is those highest level need children who are just being missed right now, and to try and get those students earlier with the wraparound care that they need, get them back in the schools where they belong. So just kind of, I think this is a way we can get to those highest need children more smoothly.
I mean, I know, okay, so I know when it comes to this, we can't necessarily do everything for everyone because we just don't have the funding. Are we?
Dr. Burns, can you?
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I know we just don't necessarily have the funding to get everyone everything that we think that they should have. Are we? I mean, I guess your opinion would probably be no, that we're not over focusing on the highest need, but like, what about those kids that are sort of in the middle and but are desperate, like, and can easily? I'm thinking of the child we just lost at Leesburg High, was probably not a huge scream for help that was obvious to everybody, but still, we lost.
I hear what you're asking, and the answer is we're going to be more intentional. I think with these 6 folks at the region and the plan we're building at each school, there'll be tiers of identification. A universal screener is in our plan, and I think that's going to help. There are going to be stopgap points by where we would find these children. Right now, students returning from Baker Act, one Baker Act, you might not be super high risk. And right now, those children are just returned to school because there are some legal communication difficulties between agencies. That's an area where we're working now with law enforcement and legal to remove that barrier, so that now we're going to address every student who returns from Baker Act. So I do think we're being more intentional at every level of need. We're going to be more intentional with universal. That stuff at the social and emotional curriculum. We want to start building those skills as well. But this plan has to be 90% built on the kids who are at risk and the highest at risk. Okay. But we're going to be more intentional at all levels.
Can I ask just a different question? And that is, with our relationship with Livestream and understanding that when a child is identified, that there are times when Livestream has other resources that we don't as a school district.
Yes, sir.
Would we be better off to partner with them that these positions are Livestream positions, so that person, these 6 mental health specialists, that they actually then could react quicker instead of having to go through our coordinator, and then the coordinator gets other resources? Could we not look at that maybe?
Yes, absolutely. This plan has been so carefully considered in my brain. I've really talked about and thought about all of those things. And here's my answer. I think the answer is no. I think they need to be our people, because not only are these folks delivering direct services, they'll be able to deliver some level of what we do in education, direct services. They'll be able to have therapeutic or counseling sessions. However, we also need these folks to manage our mental health plan that we're creating. This is a whole new entity that we're kind of dropping down on top of schools, and we have some high expectations for what we want schools to be doing, adding a whole level of problem solving with, you know, a topic that is uncomfortable. So we need to be able to have folks who can be accountable to us in terms of the work that we need. And if those were 6 live stream folks, they wouldn't be able to do the kind of educational things that we need them to do.
But
So-
if they're our folks, can they do the kind of things that Livestream can do?
No, sir, to a point.
Right.
They can do a point, but we still need our live stream partners to provide those extra services and help us in those clinical situations that we can't cover. So I think you need both, and that's why I kind of landed where I landed.
Okay, thanks.
So these mental health specialists, the 6 people here, that aids us in the identification stages, right?
I'm sorry, ask me that again.
These 6 people, they help us in the identification stages of these students.
They are going to help us at all stages, yes, sir. Yes. I bet that doesn't answer your question from the look of your
No,
face.
I'm waiting for the next one to come.
Well, okay, so I'm just trying to think about the identification point part of things, because I mean, so many of the stories we've seen of the youth that have tragically ended in the news. I guess I'm looking for how are we picking up on that cry for help, and how are we addressing it, and what resources are going to be in place to ensure that we've caught that cry for help, even if it's subtle.
So I think when you dig into this, and I know you're anxious to, when you get
I
into
started
this a
flipping.
little bit,
I am anxious.
you'll see some of the structures that we're putting in place that will do that. And those 6 folks who are going to come on board, plus the clinical coordinator, are going to be involved in the planning and the implementation of all of this. And so we not only will have the infrastructure for level 1, level 2, level 3, but we're going to identify through universal screener and through different kinds of situations where we're going to alert teams that could be a red flag. Do you know what I mean? We're going to teach them further awareness and signs to look for. So it's all in education and having the infrastructure, and that's what we're creating. It's major. It's huge.
I think the key to that is the training component that is also required in legislation that she's built into the plan that our teachers have really been asking for, is to help with those risk factors and identifying students at risk. And so that's another huge component that I think you'll see in the plan too to help with that.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
That's great.
And here's a piece of the training. One part of the training, the state has chosen Youth Mental Health First Aid as the official mental health awareness program that's going to be rolled out in the state of Florida. So you're going to hear a lot more about that in the coming months. I'm sure you'll be interested in taking the training, and all of our teachers, they decided 5th grade through 12 will be engaged in becoming first aiders. And so that is learning the signs and the symptoms of mental health, and how do you differentiate an obstinate 12-year-old who's typically developing from a student who may be on the track for having some serious mental health difficulties. So that's a big piece of the training. Another piece of the training that I've included in the plan is some high-level specific trainings that can be provided to parents. I think that's a piece that we want to build in the plan desperately, is parents also they reach out for help. How do I help my child who has ADHD? How do I recognize anxiety? How do I help my child who's being bullied at school? Those kinds of trainings, Livestream have professionals who are ready and willing to provide those trainings at night with parents and school professionals. So what I built in the plan was a certain number of trainings that each school could purchase, if you will, from Livestream, and for parents or school staff. And they could certainly ask for more if they wanted to, but I wanted to include a certain number for each school so that they have access to some of this training.
Do we have, in the plan, are there presentations on, to the actual students? Like an auditorium type presentation that, teaches kids how to help their friends or recognize a friend in need
Whether or
then
not,
they can ask an adult?
Right, whether or not and how we do that, figuring that out and deciding is in the plan, yeah. Lots of decisions in terms of scope, sequence, procedures, have not been done yet. But what you'll see in here is, here's an implementation team, here's what we're going to talk about, and let's make a plan. That's one of the major things that we want to talk about.
So we're planning the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
The plan is so big, we have to plan for the plan.
Who decided that fifth grade was the appropriate place to
The
start?
program, Youth Mental Health First Aid, that's a nationally evidence-based program, and that's what they decided. And actually, it was based on feedback from participants in the trainings. Because the focus is adolescents, what they found was the teachers for K through about 4 didn't get much out of the program. That was the feedback that I got from our SEDNet person.
Does that mean that they don't need a different program?
Bingo.
Certainly we can consider that, yeah. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. So speaking of making a plan for the plan, we have decided a few things when it comes to providing a universal screener, and one is that we want to do it. I think there's a lot of value. Mr. Dodd, your point is important and heard, that we have to have some real structures in place to catch students, to identify students. And the nature of a universal screener is it over-identifies. It's going to identify, if we go with a nationally normed screener, about 15% of our students. 15%. So there's the caution, right? Now, this is a screener who's going to identify kids who are at risk. This is not a screener that's going to identify the student who is likely to cause harm, or it's not that kind of a screener. It's a very general screener. Is the student struggling with possibly anxiety, depression, aggression, self-regulation, social skills, and so it's a broad screener. And what it will do is help teams at the schools identify students who might benefit from that first tier of intervention, possibly the second tier of intervention, that top tier. We haven't, what I want to do is get together some stakeholders. And if any of you would like to participate, that would be wonderful. But I'm going to get some principals, some live stream folks, some people who will be implementing to come together and make some final decisions about how we're going to do this, what we're going to roll out, which grades we're going to do, that kind of thing. Okay?
So this universal screener is going to screen, let's just take a high school, everyone in the high school.
Well, that's our decision.
Whose
There are some
decision?
districts, the district.
Okay.
There's a district in Florida that's screening every student. I don't think that's prudent.
Okay, so if you screened every student, then you're saying 15% of those would show they needed some additional support.
Based
right?
on national norms of the measures.
6,000 to 8,000 kids.
And then what does that look like then?
Well, that's why I'm not recommending we screen every student. I'm not sure what that would look like.
I mean, so so who decides who we screen?
The little task force of stakeholders that I'm going to get together. It is completely our decision. Whether or not we choose a universal screener is not mandated by the state. We don't have to.
But sometimes those that I know have taken their life, for example, that you would think they're completely okay, right?
Yes.
And then
That's why a universal screener can never be a single data point when you're deciding what to do for a child.
Well, and wouldn't there be that team in place too? So once you get the
Yes.
results back, then you sit and have a conversation. These are the kids that came up. This is the teacher, the guidance counselor, the mental health specialist.
But you just said we weren't going to screen every
Right,
kid.
so
No,
if we
we're not.
don't
Yeah,
screen
we're not.
everyone,
Right, we'll have
then
this.
how do we
Who else is getting it?
capture?
Yeah, but how do we screen every kid in this district?
I don't even know what the screening looks like.
All right, is it computer-based? How long is it going to take? And
Yeah.
will it be on the testing calendar?
That actually
Lots
has
of
been
decisions.
asked.
And if you
I'm
get too
sure.
many, then a teacher,
Right.
it affects their evaluation.
Right.
No, in all seriousness,
Yes.
this universal screener is well, gosh, it's a big question to try to answer. So if you're not screening everybody, it's not really truly universal, so you're going to miss some kids, right? How do
There
you miss the
is
ones that are going
research
to be in the news?
behind the ideal grades to screen, and has to do with how kids develop and when mental health challenges most appear, like
Middle school.
screening kindergartners.
Right, not a big deal.
I wouldn't recommend we screen
So is it going to be
kindergartners
like
with
the
this.
Naglieri, where we screen all first graders with the Naglieri?
That's for potentially eligibility for gifted.
Right,
but yeah, similar.
So are we going to by not screening everybody, are we going to screen all 12-year-olds, all fifth graders or sixth graders or whatever?
I think what the stakeholders will do is decide on a grade or two.
So what you shared with me from the research is that they recommend screening all students in grades 5 and grade 8, that transitional year into high school, which that's that critical year, which I strongly support that as a group that would be screened, catching them during that transitional year. We know historically and through research that that is the grade, not only academically and all the transitions to high schools where there may be some students there that we absolutely would miss if we don't do a universal screener. I think the debate for me comes whether or not it is appropriate or that we have the buy-in and support, and this is going to require a lot of parent communication for us to be screening 5th graders. It goes back, I know Dr. Burns, you talk a lot about parents concerned about what are you doing with this data and how are you collecting this data. So we have to have a strong communication plan and buy-in from parents to do that. I think if we're going to do it with children that young, I think we're more apt in terms of our responsibility to ensure that historically in that research-based year of 8th graders is a group that I think we absolutely need to catch. But I think that'll be up for the committee because there is so much debate about do you do them all and which grade levels do you do. And so I think for them to get into the research and develop that communication plan to talk to parents about who and when and why is going to be critical. So that's why we don't have the answer today. But certainly your feedback and insight on that would be critical, I think, as they make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. And how are we ensuring, are these screeners required to go under HIPAA?
So because they're in education, they are covered under FERPA. They do have privacy, and they are protected by student rights and privacy. So they would be highly protected information. And depending on how we give the screener, everything's digitalized now. And so we have ways of getting digitalized reports for classrooms, for schools, to help us build interventions that are more broad. But if we wanted to stay away from that, we could go paper pencil and never have to make it digitalized, and it would be in the child's folder and be completely private. But those are decisions for the team, but certainly all that will be considered.
And when you speak about the team, this is setting the protocol. That's what you're looking for information about?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mini team of the team.
So let's say you I'm struggling with this 15% number. So let's say you screen all your 5th graders. Are 15% of them going to kind of come back, or is that 15% just if you screened everybody in the district?
No. 15% typically if you're screening over a certain number of kids.
Okay.
So if you screen 50 kids, 15% won't, we're talking about large numbers of children. If we
Okay.
screened everybody in the district.
So that number will be more reasonable if you're just focusing on key grades. But now, let's say you do screen all your 5th graders. There's going to be some sense of over-identification, if
Yes.
not 15%. So what happens with that information from that point? Do parents all receive this report? Is it going to go home to parents who go, what in the world?
Right.
Or does it only go home if there's an issue? Or I'm confused.
There's decisions to make, but what the first step would be for the school team to have that information and make decisions based not only on a single point. We have to really caution that with these teams. We have to consider other things that are going, other warnings. We have an early warning system. Look at those data points. Do we see multiple risk factors? And when we do, absolutely, the first thing is to involve the parent. Now, we're going to involve the parent on the 80% who come back normal, or average, I should say, not normal. Maybe we do want to. I think that's our decision.
Is there an opt-in to the screener?
That's our decision. We can get active parent consent or passive consent.
Because I know parents that get very upset just at the BMI screens, and whether or not their kid do not want their children to be
there will always
in
be
a BMI screen.
There will always be an out if that's your question. I'm sorry.
Out
There will always be an out.
opt-in.
How we ask them
Right.
could be different.
Well, and they may be part of the problem,
That's
by
right.
the way.
That's
I
why
mean, so this is very
that's why I didn't want
complicated.
an opt-in, because if that is the case, then they wouldn't necessarily see the necessity to opt in. But
That's
if
right.
they are an involved parent that doesn't want their child being tested for whatever reason, they could opt out.
Can always opt out.
Yeah, so the task force, this group would also look at what happens between 5th and 8th grade, right? I've seen a lot of kids leave elementary school, right? And they just don't have the maturity level there to even understand the gravity of some of the complexities of life. But somewhere between 5th and 8th grade, boy, those are some real traumatic years. I've got a 6th grader uprising 7th grader, so and I think she's pretty normal. But I've seen many other kids as a result of those interactions. They go, "Oh my goodness, what has happened?" So I don't want to wait till 8th grade to suddenly try to screen people. So what happens in that
There
6th, 7th, 8th grade?
So at every grade level, there are teams who identify kids who are struggling. We already do it for academic and behavior, and we're adding the mental health component. And we're going to teach them the ways to identify those kids in terms of mental health who need identification. We're going to do that at every grade level. This is an added measure at 8th, for example, if we went with 8th, because we know that those are, that's a year where there's so much, many mental health issues are beginning to arise. You know, we just know that's a year that it's particularly critical. But we are going to address and identify kids who need help at every grade level.
I know that when I was involved at St. Paul's on the board there, that for the 8th graders, that you had these really sweet kids, and then they left for Christmas break, and they came back, and they were different. Like somebody had poured water on them.
Well, I will
so the
tell
hormones, there's a whole lot of different things that are going on.
Yes, sir, and it's something to discuss because in the literature, you know, there's a debate that October and February are the months to screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's for us to decide whether or not we want to do it twice. You know, again, it's going to come down to lots of discussion and consideration by that team.
But also, isn't there an age where schizophrenia begins to show itself? And that's when you're older. Yeah, like 17.
Yeah.
So
there
these
are
would be high
cases.
school kids.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We want to screen before they get to high school. Yes, sir. Okay.
But if we screen before they get to high school, we would miss them at
Bingo.
Well,
that age.
Bingo.
again, we are going to be identifying kids at every
Well,
grade
you said
level.
12th grade also, right?
I think we have to decide if what's in the research strongly is 5th and 8th.
For this particular screener.
this-
so
for-
we've got to have
for
other
just this
strategies in
one.
place
Yes.
to identify 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th. So there are going to be other strategies that won't necessarily be this particular
Yes.
screener, but
Yes, sir. Every grade.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
Mr.
So-
Gamble says, move it along. All right, let me get through the rest, and then we'll open for more questions.
all right.
So in the plan, when you get into it a little bit, you'll see that there's built in, I really do think we should start providing more outreach to parents and community. And there are some ways that, again, teams of people deciding what would be the best way. We have to do some needs assessment and figure out what our parents need. And those materials, I anticipate that I could probably get those for 20. That's why 20,000 is there. And I think that's every line on the expenditures document. I don't know if you want to go back and address any, and it puts the total at $1,038,000. Appreciating Mr. Mathias's comment that probably ought to reflect $1,044,000, and I should prepare a needs assessment above that, because certainly I agree that it's not all that we need to be doing.
Right, so, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So thinking about when you mentioned barriers, what are the barriers to getting these students help at Livestream? It seems like identification process, obviously that needs to exist. But one of the, how about time, the time barrier? Interested in knowing more about what kind of lead time exists from the identification of the student currently to when they actually begin receiving services. And I asked this question from some personal experience. I had a student one time who was referred to Livestream, and they said it'll be at least 6 weeks before you see somebody for the first time. And I'm thinking, a month and a half? And the parent, I could see the panic on her face going, what am I supposed to do for a month and a half? What do I do? And they said, well, we're just short-staffed. We don't have the people on duty to be able to see you now. I just don't want that to be our answer going forward. So how do we solve that problem? And what is the lead time? I got a lot of questions in there.
So in my collaboration with Livestream, they believe that their backlog would be cleared up over the summer, for example, so that the lead time would be rather quickly. I can't answer for exactly what it is for them. The way that we filled in the gap there, because we have experienced that in the past, is we now have agreements with 9 private community agencies for family and child counseling. So we have 10 different agencies who have credentialed therapists who we also share referral processes with at the school. So if there's a wait for Livestream, we can very quickly refer them to another community agency that does therapy.
Is that some data that we might be able to start tracking and
Absolutely.
developing some sort of metrics to see if that is a widespread issue, or I mean, if it's just isolated, then that's easier to perhaps address. But that might give us some information on having the resources in the right place. And I guess on a broader scale, psychologists as well. I've heard from parents from time to time who have said, my kid is supposed to be tested eventually for something, but the psychologist is too busy. That it'll be half a year until they're even tested. So that's probably a broader issue, but that's the same kind of topic of, are we finding out how long it's going between?
Yes, sir. I agree. We have outcome measures built into the plan. There are some required by the state. We're building in extras for our own, and certainly that would be easy to build in as an outcome measure. I don't want to open the floor to talking about other bigger issues, but there's a state-mandated time frame for which evaluations must be completed by psychologists, and they, at a very high rate, meet that. I know it seems like a long time for parents. It's 60 calendar days.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've always met that.
Is it 60 calendar days or working days?
Calendar days
Actual calendar days.
from the day the parent signs the consent. And so, problematically, sometimes parents are working with the school for months and months and months on interventions before we make decisions about doing a referral. So they may sign, but they may have been working with the school for previous months, and in their mind, it is taking a long time. I understand.
Or
A parent
is there-
can request a testing, correct?
I'm
A
sorry.
parent can, with
Absolutely.
written request, a parent can ask for the testing, and then they have 60 days from that written request, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So I wonder if part of the challenge is that schools are not putting that paper in front of the parent in a timely manner to do the testing, and so therefore that 60-day period isn't starting until you've already been in this process for 6 months.
Well, I'm sorry that this is a completely different topic,
It
but
is.
I do want to
I didn't-
address what you're saying, because what is best practice and what is in the law is that we try and meet kids' needs prior to even considering ESE, because we want to be able to meet their needs in the classrooms.
Right.
And that's what the MTSS process
Sure.
is for. And so that's what school teams should be doing. I would hate it if every time a child struggled, they threw out that consent for testing.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
But when a parent requests, absolutely, no question.
Back to the subject at hand.
Yes, sir.
These other agencies that you talked about that would help funding, what type of funding?
No funding.
Okay,
We have agreements with them where they provide it free to families.
okay,
They may do billing on their part, but it's free to families.
okay.
Then, can you elaborate how do we help the families that need to be on Medicaid get on Medicaid? Are we referring them to I know that there's people that help people get on Obamacare, or whatever we call it in Florida.
There are similar folks who have those roles for Medicaid as well. I can't even pretend to be an expert. I'm just starting to learn about it myself. I didn't realize Medicaid had so many different plans, and
They do.
have many different. It's amazing. So what we're doing is we're training our social workers. When you're working with a family and they're experiencing any kind of behavioral or mental health, medical, that needs to be one of your first questions. Do you have insurance? And if not, let me help you apply for Medicaid. So that's one way we're tackling it.
So we're just linking these people up, basically.
Oh yes, I don't have any control over getting them the Medicaid, but attempting to get them to the services is certainly the first step.
So are we doing it online to help them do it that way, or we're doing paper?
I actually have several social workers that will sit with them and do it online.
Okay.
If they're
That's great.
interested. Yeah, absolutely.
Expedited.
Yes.
Other questions?
Did you say the 60 days, was that about what Mark's concern was, or is that in the statute with one of these kids that
No, sir. It's specific to psychoeducational evaluations for ESC, not
Oh,
related to this
okay.
at all.
Good, because 60 days would be a long time. That's right.
I would just like to tell you, Dr. Landry, and I think that I can speak for all of us, that this is such a new topic for everybody to be exploring, and I appreciate the plan that you are looking at all of these pieces and you're including stakeholders and you are trying to put something forward that's going to help our students. When I sit up here and kind of think about some of the questions that we're asking on this side and how to help these kids, and then we talk about the parent and the home aspect that we have to wrap around a service, and I can't imagine trying to wrap around, and I just want to say thank you, because I feel like we are trying to help our society that doesn't have resources and help at home, and I don't even know what that looks like. And so this is a great start, and we appreciate you sitting up there and taking our questions and really hearing our concern, and to you guys to hear your concerns and the compassion.
Yes.
It's very comforting to sit up here and see that we're considering the whole child, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, so we are on board member comments. Yes?
Yes, we are.
Okay, you were
Yes,
looking at
we
me
are.
funny. Okay.
Oh.
Mr. Mathias.
I'll hold.
Okay.
Boy.
Okay.
Well, I just want to throw out, I don't know if we need to get this as an agenda topic at some point, but I know I've been hearing from folks who haven't heard much about the referendum and ensuring that we have a good campaign out there to get the word out and what the truth of it is. So I'd be interested in talking more about our strategies around that, or talking points, so maybe putting some things that we had done for the sales tax in place to help this pass.
Yes, Mr. Mathias.
Yeah, I actually can't speak to it because we are on such a quick schedule.
That's right.
That I know that Alex Patton, the fellow that did the survey for us, that he has worked with Sherry Owens.
Okay.
That, again, it's going to be so quick and not the opportunity to really raise a lot of funds. So if anybody wants to donate, that Alex is going to come down and organize a PAC, because we have to do it that way. And then we'll try and solicit some funds. And that the strategy right now is, you can come speak. Yeah, it'd be better if Sherry, because they talked yesterday.
Welcome, Miss Owens.
Hello, good morning.
I'm totally digging that shirt.
Thank you. Lanyard too, all
Yeah,
girls.
yeah.
But yes, I did speak with Mr. Patton, and we've already put together some web pages that it really is an informational campaign to make sure that people in the district understand what the money would be for, some of the needs, that kind of thing, just basic, straight information. And so that has already been vetted internally. We'd like to have Steve and his team take a look at that before we make it public, but it is set and ready to go with Steve's blessing. Also spoke with Mr. Patton, gave him some of the information that we have, and he's going to take the next step and build on that and make sure that information gets to the community that way. We've also spoken with a local company about doing a radio discussion on a live radio show about it. Again, our role would be just informing the public about it. And so that we have a date to record that. Again, we want to get Steve's blessing on that before we move forward, because we know that there are certain lines that we as a district cannot cross, and we want to make sure that he's comfortable with us going forward with that. But we do have a date for that, and then we would take excerpt, back up, from the radio show. That would then air on local cable TV, and then we would take excerpts from that and use that on social media to help inform the public as well. So we would be hitting in several ways. There would be a mailing that would go out separate from the district. That's independently done. But then from the district, there would be the website, there would be the social media campaign, there would be the discussion on radio, and then we always send things out to parents and to the community through our e-flyers on Peach Jar. So those are some of the things that we're looking at.
What about signs?
I'm sorry?
I know we had discussed signs. What about signs?
I haven't talked about signs, but that is something that we can do, signage.
I think signage is more effective than mailers. I mean, are we physically doing a mailer?
That's being done independently from the district.
Right now, there's not the funding.
Mailers are expensive.
That's right. There isn't the funding.
Signs are less expensive.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't do a single mailing.
Me neither.
In 2014. But
So I like the sign idea, and right now the intent was social media. So that's what we were going to have the money for.
Okay.
But it all depends on being able to raise some additional dollars. The signs we do fairly cheap. I think I like that a lot.
how about recruiting volunteers to be at the polling locations on election day, talking to
Right.
folks as they're going in? I found that was an incredibly effective method. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, I operated a campaign on $6,000, so it required free methods, and volunteers doing that are very effective.
I think some of the concern is that as a district, we are very limited.
So what can occur
in-
as a district versus a PAC? All right.
Exactly.
So that's where I'm
Exactly.
really confused as to where the lines draw and where they blur.
I think we can inform, we can't advocate.
Advocate.
Exactly.
So-
Is that
That's my
us as board
understanding.
members, or is that just the district?
The
Because I
district.
believe we can advocate.
We can advocate individually.
Right.
But the district can get information, which
Yes.
is critically important, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And so, and then to have that push.
So,
the signs
so I guess
or
my
whatever.
question is then, okay, so some of these elements are PAC related, so how do we get involved in that discussion to figure out strategies, like this election day thing? That's a PAC thing, right?
To have volunteers at the polls.
That's right, And-
No, that wouldn't
Or
necessarily.
is that a
the
district
PAC
thing?
The PAC is strictly for the funding.
Okay, all right.
That's it.
So if we're talking, we want concerned parents to show up and organize this effort of, hey, you cover precinct 1, you get 2, 3, 4, 8, 20, pick the popular ones, 101.
Right.
But then where do we coordinate those efforts
Well,
to help get that word out?
My thinking, and I would ask the attorney to correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that is not something that the district would do, that we will inform people, here's the date, here's where you can get information about how to register, here's how much we're asking for, here's how much it might cost a homeowner with a home that costs this much, assessed at such and such value. That's why I'm referring to it as an informational campaign, not a marketing campaign.
Sure.
Very different.
So if you're informing the
Yes.
public by handing out the information, right? That's just the information that's on our website at the poll. I mean, does that
Well,
not?
interesting you should mention that, because on the web pages that we've put together that we're just waiting to be blessed, there is a flyer, a front and back flyer that again just repeats what is on that website, strictly informational, not advocating or not telling people how to vote, but giving them the information. That flyer, I think it would be okay if someone passed that out, but I am going to defer to our legal counsel
Alan
on
Hayes
that.
when you talk to, because there's some restrictions about how close to the
Well,
poll.
yeah, I
and
mean,
all that
they'd
stuff.
obviously comply with all the rules of
Yeah.
campaigning, but
But
I mean, some of us who don't have our own campaign to launch this year could be spending that election day focused on getting this referendum
Some
going,
of us, there's
right?
2 of us. You can say our names.
3 of us.
No, I was going to say, there's
That's right, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. But one was up and then had nobody, so I guess he could take the lead on this,
Well,
actually.
that's exactly what I'm asking about here.
I nominate, yeah.
Yeah, we nominate
1,000%.
Okay, maybe we just need to have more in-depth conversation.
Well,
As to what can happen, what can't happen, and
But,
what's
but,
happening through.
but in all seriousness, Mark, I can share Alex's number. That would be amazing if you and Alex work
Yeah,
together.
I'd like to have some more
Because I got to
conversation.
focus really on what I'm doing, because I do have, I really don't have an opponent, but I do have a race.
Elizabeth, what were you going to say?
Sure. Seeing as this is my first election cycle in this capacity, I do want to go back and we can prepare some more information for Monday's meeting about exactly where the lines are drawn. But as far as handing out a promotional or a informational sheet that the district provides, I don't see a problem with that. But Ms. Owens is correct about there is a line between information and marketing. And so if someone chooses to print off the flyer that the district has prepared, that is their own choice, and to pass that out, that I think is fine. But as far as marketing, that's a farther step.
But also, if you could find out to what degree
That's right.
that we can
Correct.
interact about it, because during the sales tax initiative,
Right.
that I was the liaison, but all the board members were not, we didn't have discussions all about it. It was the committee, the PAC, or actually what the PAC, it was a committee.
And see, the benefit of that sales tax was that there were other agencies and municipalities
That's exactly
involved.
right.
But this is all us, right? I mean, so if we don't get the word
Get
out,
it out.
nobody's really helping us do that.
Well,
That's
we
right.
have, I think too that we can discuss, and I don't, when you guys want to do this, we can ask Ms. Carnegie when we have some time available on some agendas, and it's got to be rather quickly. But I know that Ms. Carnegie and I are going to Lakeview Terrace, and I think it's August 21st, to just inform them about the sales tax. I know that 2 of us are on the campaign trail, and in all of our meetings, that sales tax referendum has come up, which is important. It was realtors, it was with, we've been to a couple of different communities, we're still going. So we're able to do some of that
That's right.
through that, but it would be nice for you to know, or for you guys to know, where we've been and who we've talked to, so we can maybe fill in the gaps. And I also am thinking of some of our zealous parents that are very concerned about mental health, that are very vocal on social media, that we could engage in this conversation too.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm sure they'd love to help.
I'm sure they would love to help.
Since
So-
I've been on the SRO tour, meeting with all of our city officials, Of course, they now have a vested interest because they know that this is going to help fund those SROs in our schools in the coming year. So I know that they are very willing and open to whatever support they can provide. Our city council, all of them have reached out to say, you know, whatever we can do, as we would like to help promote and inform. So whatever we can do to engage them, I think will be helpful as well.
Is there a league of cities, because they have a vested interest in this?
I think that their August meeting is their ethics training.
Oh.
I think, I'll double check.
August will be.
Because they gave us
don't really
initial
be
seed
talking
money on
about
the
this
sales tax.
They may have July. I don't know if they meet over the summer. Okay. We can check that. Okay. Thank you. Very good conversation.
Thanks.
Okay.
Was that all? Were you finished?
Yeah, no, that was my major topic. I've got the other stuff for Monday.
Okay.
But,
Oh, I can't wait till Monday because I'll be in South Carolina hoping for an over-the-fence hit this time. So I wanted to bring up something, a conversation I had with Mr. Mock, and I'm just going to tell you I haven't had this conversation with you yet, but I figured since it was Mr. Mock and it wasn't related to your operations necessarily. One of our good grief. The tax collector's office also facilitates driver's license. They conduct driver's license. So I spoke briefly with Mr. Mock because I've been speaking with David Jordan at the tax collector's office about the possibility of combining the driver's education courses we offer with the certifying drivers for their driver's license because they are backed up. So they're looking at sometimes up to 6 months of a waiting period for a student to be able to be tested for their driver's license, right? So imagine being 16. So we have for the driver's ed program, and they reached out to me to see if we could maybe do some conjunction there where they would test in our driver's ed program and certify for their license, and all they would have to do at the tax collector's office is then hand that certificate in and get their driver's license. So it would help them, it would help us, it would help our students. So with your blessing, I know Mr. Mock has already brought his audit plan forward, but we'd like to see if this would be something that would even be what's our return on investment here? What's our cost versus the outcome? So if you guys are favorable, I'm going to ask him to look at his report and bring it back to look into that. Yes? Okay. So, Mr. Mock, if you just want to prepare something we can formally look at, that would be fantastic. We spoke briefly about it, so I'm bringing that up to him, too.
So the fees you take to get a license, that they're to pay the district?
Yes, to some degree, yes. So that's what was intriguing about it, was it could possibly be something that we could use to fund some, I don't know if that's capital or, I mean, all of those questions are still out there. And we would have to pay to certify people to do that. So there's a cost on our end for professional development certification, but would that cost be outweighed by the return? So we'll look into that then. Okay.
So, because then we hold just about every 16-year-old in our possession.
We do.
I mean, right? I mean, so
Almost.
can we almost right? Just
Right.
about every 16-year-old.
That's
So would
That's what I said.
Can we do them all?
That's what we're looking at.
Okay.
So we're gonna.
Very intriguing.
Add some attendance requirements.
That's right.
Looking really concerned.
Universal screeners. Oh no. Okay. Sorry. All right.
Just in closing today, today is our very first hiring event. You know, we've had teacher recruitment fairs, but happening right now as we are seated here is over at Mount Dora High School is our first big recruitment fair for all employees. So we've got all of our school leaders there, and they're talking to individuals interested in custodial positions. We're recruiting for bus drivers. All that's happening today. So now I'm going to try and leave here and get over there and stop by if you have an opportunity to do so. I think it concludes at 1, if I'm not 2. No. Noon. It concludes at noon. Yes. So we'll have to hurry.
I can make it.
You will have to hurry. I would imagine, I think they've had a good response. It may go a little past that. And then this evening, you've all been invited to Umatilla. The city of Umatilla is sponsoring a meet and greet to meet and greet the 3 new principals that they have in their Umatilla schools. It's from 4 to 6 at Gators in Umatilla. So they'd asked that if I extend that welcome to you all to attend if you'd like to. So, and I appreciate them coming together as a city to host and to welcome these folks to their schools.
All right. Anything else? All right. We are adjourned.